Nice to meet you, by the way.
Mr. Peterson, so nice to meet you. I have to confess, I'm a little bit, how you call it, starstruck because you're a hero of mine. Reminds me a little bit on my interview with Mick Jagger I did some 40 years ago in the early 80s. And, and I thought, damn, he's Mick Jagger. I'm not a bit Mick Jagger. And I was only calmed down when I realized that I was a bit taller than he is.
Oh, that's
So,
good. It's good to have that advantage.
so how tall are you?
I'm 6'1".
Oh, shit.
Oh, well.
At the end of the interview, I'm six. So at the end of the interview, I have a little request, Mr. Peterson, because um, you're my hero, but the same goes for my son, who studies psychology and has a bachelor in psychology. And he worked for a foster home with a foster home, and there was a grueling experience because the kids are dumped, and so he continues studying now. Psychology, economic psychology, and he asked me if you could please send him a greeting at the end of the
Sure.
interview. If that would be
Yep.
possible, it would be so great. Thank
Yep.
you very
Yeah,
much.
no problem.
Thank you very much.
Hey, just out of curiosity, guys, how's my lighting? Because I have a new lighting system here. Am I a little red? Is that better?
No, that's Reda.
Oh, okay.
That's bad. That's good.
That's better. Okay,
Yeah,
fine.
that's good. That's good.
Okay.
Mr. Peterson, before we discuss your book on the story of the chosen people, amongst other things, I'd like to talk a minute with you about the very unchosen people of Germany. Do you agree?
Yes, yes.
The thing is, I
It's
have
very
to.
distressing from outside to watch what's happening to Germany. It's
It's
very
even more.
bad.
It's even more distressing from the inside. Tell you, and I have to send a trigger warning in before. Maybe you know that Elon Musk wrote an op-ed piece at the newspaper Die Welt, where I gave a short stint, but later to that. And the editor of the op-ed desk resigned after that because she couldn't tolerate an opinion that was contrary to her own companion. So a big buzz here in Germany, election interference. The government claimed it is unlawful and all this stuff. Funny fact. Our government went very much ahead in favor of Kamala Harris in the U.S. election.
Yeah,
That's the way we play it here. So,
yeah, yep. Same
but
in
since
Canada.
you since
It's the
you
same in
advise to
Canada.
engage in conflict, I'm very hopeful that we have a good discussion. Mr. Dr. Peterson, we German people need help. As you might know, our government collapsed coincidentally at the same day when Donald Trump was voted in for president, and and we Germans are heading for a new election. And although the country is ruined economically and morally, primarily by the woke ideology and green climate regime, there is no hope of change because of a cartel of parties and mainstream media that exclude the only real opposition party, the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland. According to the polls, we are heading towards a continuation of the same old bad. It's a
Mm.
desperate
Oh,
situation. We
yeah,
really need a psychiatrist.
yeah.
Do you know of any good? What can we do?
Well, it's really to address the problems you're laying out at the deepest possible level that I wrote this book.
Yeah.
And I would say have been working on all the material that I've been working on for what, 40 years, 45 years, long time now. Because, and this really became clear to me writing this book, to get the terminology exactly right. We're in a culture war, and there's a reason for that. And the reason for that is that the empiricists and the rationalists were wrong. And the postmodernists, although not only the postmodernists, were right about one key thing. What the postmodernists were right about, now this was discovered in other disciplines simultaneously, so I don't want to give them too much credit, but they deserve a certain amount of credit because they got this fundamental proposition correct. We see the world through a story, or more accurately, a description of the structure through which we see the world is a story. And a story is a way of prioritizing facts. The problem with the empirical or the rational perspective, so that's the Enlightenment perspective, is that there's no account for the prioritization of facts. And that is a fatal error. That's the value problem, fundamentally, because the manner in which you prioritize facts, that is your value. Now, when you see a value structure portrayed dramatically, that's a story, or described dramatically. And you can tell how important that is to us because we're so enthralled by stories. First things first, right? Okay, so now as soon as you know that, and there's no debate about that, that's an established fact, I believe, because the computer scientists have figured it out, the AI engineers have figured it out, the literary critics have figured it out, the psychologists of perception and emotion have figured it out. Like it's the same story from 5 disciplines, and it emerged about, let's say, 60 years ago. Okay, this is the end of the Enlightenment, and that's what we're going through.
Yeah.
Now, once you know we live in a story, a number of other questions emerge. Well, is there a single unifying story? The postmodernists, they have a contradictory answer to that. One answer is no, there is no uniting meta-narrative. That's actually the core doctrine of postmodernism. But then they sleight of hand in a story, which is essentially Marxist, that's associated with power. And the problem with that is that it's actually a very compelling claim. Like power is a dominating story. Now, and if you're cynical, you say, or power mad, or hedonistic, you'll make the claim that that's the only story in town and that you're naive not to recognize it. And then you have the whole postmodern nightmare, which is there's no dialogue, there's no people of goodwill, there's just endless conflict between centers of power. And it's in the interests of the marginalized to seize the center. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the problem with that is that power is not a sustainable story. It's not the true story. And I'm trying to get to the true story. Now, why is that relevant to Germany? Well, because you Germans always seem to be on the forefront of, let's say, narrative transformations. Well, it happened with Protestantism. It happened with the Nazi Germans. It happened with the communists.
Yeah.
Well, why wouldn't it happen again? Why that is, I don't know, but it seems to be the case. Yeah. The story that power is the ultimate story, there is almost no story more evil than that.
Yeah. I totally agree. And the thing is that there are two divergent or two conflicting stories. On the one hand, it's a story, I would call it the Judeo-Christian story and the story also of common sense. The Christian religion created enlightenment in Europe. And the other story is, as you mentioned, the story of sheer power. The Germans have an additional problem, and that is called, it's German specific, that is called the infamous Deutsche Sonderweg. That is the special path, German special path, a delusion that led to 2 world wars, with a slight difference now that we no longer choose to murder other people, but commit suicide for our own people. You can call that progress, but I would say that is not the right path. It's the German special path that is here at stake, and it blows my mind, that we think we could be a shining example to the world by a very restrictive new climate or regime of new climate religion and show the world what we achieved. What we really did achieve is 15,000 bankruptcies, 50,000 little trades gave up, censorship, a monolithic lying press, and a party system that prohibits any change. So we're practically paralyzed, Dr. Peterson.
Yeah, look, I was just in Toronto in Canada, and I feel for you. The situation in Canada, like you Germans can moralize falsely, as you point out, like virtually no other people. But Canada is a contender for that problem. Yeah. One of the ways we've distinguished ourselves, let's say, from the Americans, probably since the end of the Second World War, is by stressing our peaceful and benign nature. Now, weak doesn't make you peaceful and benign, but if you are weak, claiming that you're peaceful and benign is a good camouflage for everyone, and it is this shortcut to moral superiority. And we suffer from exactly the same problems in Canada as you're suffering in Germany.
Yeah, when our farmers went,
sorry, I know. Well,
when our farmers went to the street,
because I know
we looked to Canada. We looked to Canada for the protests in Canada, and they got smashed. And our farmers' protests got smashed by a big governmental lie of, a secret meeting, and AfD is plotting to deport thousands of immigrants and the stuff. And by that, they decapitated the protests, and they let the green left troops of little soldiers conquer the street and demonstrate against the Nazis by exactly the same methods the Nazis used to utilize.
Yep. Yeah. Well, again, there's echoes of precisely that in Canada, as you know. I mean, the Trudeau government shut down people's bank accounts. That was the worst thing I've ever seen the Canadian government do by an order of magnitude. It was, first of all, it just shocked me. I can still hardly believe it. And I don't think Canadians have any idea what that did to Canada's international reputation. Certainly Trudeau doesn't care because he still thinks he was right, and he shut down the Canadian Nazis. It's like, there are no Nazis in Canada. Or if there are, they're purely a construct of Trudeau, because there certainly weren't any, with the possible exception of Quebec, 50 years ago. And Quebec's its own pathological story, but I mean, it's dreadful to see. And what Germany is doing is so. See, I've been trying to work this out too. Why these bloody Marxist ideas won't go away. And I think part of the reason is that Marxism is actually the expression of pathological immaturity. And so it's not accurate only to think about it as a system of ideas. It's more accurate to think about it as the system of ideas that pathologically immature, hedonistic, power-mad people automatically gravitate to, regardless of time or place. And that Marxism was just a fairly sophisticated expression of that. And so it's very difficult to eradicate, so to speak. That's the wrong terminology, but it's going to be reborn with each generation to some degree. And we don't understand political thinking in that regard. Now, we know that people become more conservative as they get older. Now, we haven't been able to separate out conceptually the relationship between maturity and political view. Now, you could imagine that as you become more mature, you live more for the future. So you can delay gratification better. So you're much less hedonistic. That's virtually the definition of maturity. But there's a social element too, which is that the more mature you are, the more you prioritize other people, and in some ways a broader and more sophisticated range of other people. Now that takes work, right? That's really the work of civilization, is to inculcate that view.
as a learned Marxist, and I know that you also been a Marxist in your youth, I had the idea back then that change only comes about with a revolutionary upheaval, with violence. And now we see this strange spectacle in the USA that you can bring about change in the voting booth. Nobody would have thought that would be possible, but it seems to be a thing that's happening. And you yourself had a wonderful video, you spoke about it, that there's a new pop myth, that there's a bunch of superheroes on the work. X-Men, Wonder Woman, Captain America. So there's a new narrative in growing. And yeah, that's a hopeful sign, isn't it?
I hope so. I mean, it's a difficult thing to fully comprehend. I mean, as I said in that video, I had concerns about Trump, let's say, not that that makes me unique in any way, because he has many of the characteristics of someone who's narcissistic. And yeah. I say that very carefully. Narcissistic people are extroverted and disagreeable. That's the cardinal personality elements. And Trump is hyper extroverted. I mean, like, I don't know if there's a more extroverted person alive than Donald Trump. I mean, I saw him in Phoenix. He's what? Yeah. How old is he? 78?
Yeah.
I saw him at a rally in Phoenix. He got up to speak at 10 p.m. So that's late. And he'd already been to like 2 other events. And he spoke for a protracted period of time. And the audience was getting tired. They'd been in that auditorium for like 4 hours. And Trump, he was just raring to go. Like, the guy's he's remarkable in that regard. And he's very disagreeable, at least with regards to this aspect called politeness. And so, but what I've seen modify that is, well, he's willing to share the stage. And that is not a characteristic of someone who's narcissistic. Trudeau, for example, in Canada, who's clearly narcissistic, and probably a malignant narcissist, which is even worse, because there's a sadistic element to that. He will not share the stage. He doesn't even talk to his cabinet ministers. He's got nothing but contempt for Parliament. But Trump has these remarkable people around him. And, he's sort of pulled back, at least by the standards of someone like Trump. And I haven't seen any hint that that's distressing him in a way that would raise concern. And then, of course, the people around him, many of whom I know at least peripherally, at least I've interviewed them for my podcast, they're heavy hitters. And so now there's problems. There is a pathological element of the American right. I mean, I've experienced that to a substantial degree, and I've also watched them go after someone I know, Senator Dan Crenshaw. There's an anti-Semitic right. There's a racist right. That's the psychopaths who, like the psychopathic types, will grip a political ideology for their own purposes. And so there are psychopaths on the left, and there are lots of them. And there are psychopaths on the right. They're not nearly as organized. And at the moment, they're much less dangerous, but they're still troublesome. And they could be a lot of trouble. And they're very prevalent on X, and that's a problem.
But you would agree that they are blown way out of proportion, right? Under pretext of fighting the Nazis, everything seems to be okay. The government, our government at least, and yours as well, and the Kamala Harris campaign showed it, that every means is allowed and every smearing tactic is allowed as long as you fight Hitler.
Yeah, well, I think the best way of thinking about that likely is to look at places like Hungary and Poland and Italy and Sweden, and maybe even to some degree the Netherlands, but they're in a muddle that is incomprehensible. But Maloney's a good example because she was definitely pilloried as, well, the next best thing to a Nazi. And Like that just hasn't materialized in Italy at all. And I would say the same thing about Hungary and Poland, and certainly about Sweden. And so this terrible, dangerous right wing seems to be a lot less terrible and dangerous when it actually is in power. And I think you could probably make the same case, although it's early days, in Argentina.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I don't know what to make of the AfD. I mean, when outside the country, mostly we get our information about Germany from the legacy media. And so that's not information at all. It's just a propaganda stream. And of course, as far as the propagandists are concerned, the AfD might as well be Hitler reborn. Now, I'm very skeptical of that because, not least because I saw what happened with Maloney. And I've also been to Hungary multiple times. It's not obvious to me at all that it's descended into some sort of authoritarian hellhole. In fact, quite the contrary. So, but I'm ignorant with regards to the AfD, for those reasons. But yes, the danger of the right. Now, one of the problems the Americans face at the moment, and this is obviously a world problem, is that the Democrats are truly decimated. Now, it isn't obvious to me. They may have chased out every single person the party that has any courage. So, for example,
Kennedy, Tulsi Gabbard, they were all.
Those people left.
Rogan was a Democrat.
Well, but even the ones who remained. So I'll give you an example. So after Trump was defeated, CNN and MSNBC, the Democrat power structure, they're all whining about the fact that the right wing got control of the new media and that there was billions of dollars spent on that, and the Democrats missed the boat and they need their own Joe Rogan. And like, for me and for everyone, this should be for everyone, that was so preposterous you can hardly imagine it. I mean, first of all, Joe Rogan voted for Bernie Sanders.
Yes.
Joe is a lefty. Now, he's not so much anymore, but economically, Joe's a lefty. Yeah. And so the Democrats had their own Joe Rogan, and his name was Joe Rogan. And I put together a group of 8 mainline podcasters 8 years ago. This is all public knowledge. My friend Greg Hurwitz was the conduit. He's worked with the Democrats on the messaging side for about a decade. We made an offer to the Democrats to speak with them on the podcasts, and repeated offers over multiple years, and literally 0 of them took us up on the offer. 0. And that's even the case now. It's like, even now, it's almost impossible to get a Democrat to speak with me, for example, or with, say, Dave Rubin or with Ben Shapiro. And the thing is, those would be good faith conversations. I offer my podcast guests a deal. It's 2-part. The first deal is, if I talk to you and you say anything that you feel was ill thought through, then let us know and we'll rectify it if it's reasonable. Now, virtually no one has ever taken me up on that. And the second deal is, we'll do the podcast, and if you don't feel that it was fair or reasonable, then we won't run it.
Good.
Now, that's a fair deal.
Yeah. And they didn't take it.
No, God, no. I've talked to dozens of congressmen and senators on the Democrat side privately.
They wouldn't do it.
Oh, no.
They won't do it. They shut it out.
And then they complain that they're not represented. It's like, well, guys, it's not like we wouldn't have talked to you. We would have talked to you.
Yeah.
So, and still they won't. Now, so the reason I'm telling you this is, first of all, because it's so annoying, you can hardly believe it, because we did play a good faith game. But it's also the case that it's dangerous, because the Republicans under Trump need an opposition.
Yeah.
And they need one that isn't insane.
An intelligent opposition.
Yeah, an effective, moderate, centrist, grounded, intelligent, eyes open opposition.
Yeah, exactly.
That's gone. And it's gone. Partly the reason the Democrats won't speak to me is because their own people would eat them. Yeah. And then they don't like the open format discussion. They want all the talking points arranged. They want to discuss it with their staff. They want to have pre-prepared answers. None of that works on social media. You'll just get, if you do a long form podcast and you have talking points, you will get slaughtered First of all, almost no one will watch you. And the people that do will just take you apart. Everyone on social media is completely sick of that. It has to be unedited, long, spontaneous, real. And, the new viewers are very sophisticated with regards to video and audio. Like, they're professional level sophisticated. A lot of them do their own video editing. They know how this works.
Yeah. The USA's example shows that it's the internet, it's the platforms in the internet that really reach the people, and mainstream media is pretty much out of focus. My son never looks at a TV discussion or whatever. He gets his information via YouTube, via your lectures and everything. That's the point to be. And the situation in Germany is that all the talk shows do the same thing as you just described. They exclude the AfD. And like dozens of talk shows, never they invited a politician by the AfD with the argument not to give them a platform.
Yeah.
That is the main thing. You are contaminated if you even listen to them, and that is a situation where communication is no longer possible. And how to solve that? I mean,
well, when communication isn't possible, war is when communication isn't possible. Like, by definition, it may not be expressed or ongoing, but when you stop talking and you occupy the same territory, you're preparing for a fight. And well, I should also point out too that attitude of non-platforming, of non-communication, that is truly unique to the left. I didn't expect to be a conservative icon. Like, seriously, I didn't expect that. But now I've had a lot of experience with conservatives and a lot of experience with people on the left. And I have never spoken to someone on the center right, or right of that even, who would refuse to talk to someone else. That doesn't happen. On the left.
No.
It isn't that happens. It's that
that
happens all the time. That's their mode of operation. And of course, it's killing the creative left, because the entrepreneurial types, the artists, the comedians, all they have is the ability to communicate. And if they can't say their own thing, they're dead. And you can see that, because Hollywood, for example, is man, it's just dying like mad. And if Robert Kennedy stops the pharmaceutical companies from advertising, the legacy media will fold up and die pretty much overnight. Because that's all they've got left. They've got old people. And they have the pharmaceutical companies. That's it. So in regards to the AfD, so I have a question for you. And Bridget, I imagine, is still listening. If I wanted to interview someone, who should I interview?
Definitely Alice Weidel, the party chief. She speaks fluent English. She studied I think in Harvard, and she has a degree in economics, and she's very, very smart. And and in the rankings, in the popularity rankings, that's interesting enough, she is ranking at the top position as a chancellor. Chancellor can, and Elon Musk already committed himself to do an interview on X with her, and I would strongly recommend her. She's a brilliant mind, and she's blonde and German. And I would very much recommend that. But since you are mentioning Netherlands and the shift in opinions and so on, one main problem, of course, is the immigration in Germany. And it also was a very decisive matter in USA and in Canada as well. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Our immigration rate is far greater than the US.
Yeah.
Including the open border. Oh, yes, it's unbelievable.
I did not know that.
Oh, it's just beyond comprehension.
Okay.
And, I was just looking into that. So here's some interesting statistics. 100% of Catholic or Protestant majority countries outside of Europe, outside of Africa, are democratic. 100%. Okay. 6% of Muslim majority countries are democratic. 6%, 3 out of 50. Now, those three are Turkey, Indonesia, and Morocco. And they're barely democracies.
Yeah.
Now, this is a big problem right now. Why that is? Well, of course, the leftists attribute that to the oppression of the West, but we'll just ignore that because that's stupid. So we're just going to leave that sit. Now, there's a terrible question here. Now, and I've got two opinions about it. The most dismal possible explanation for that is that there's something that's core in the Islamic doctrine that fundamentally makes autocracy, because 40 out of 50 of the Muslim majority countries are autocratic as well. So it's not only that they're not democratic, right? So now the question is there a causal link between the core doctrines of Islam and autocracy and anti-democracy? And the answer to that might be yes. Now, I would say on the positive side, you see countries like the UAE and even Saudi Arabia now, the countries that signed the Abraham Accords. They're committed to modernization. They've established a peace treaty with Israel. They would like to turn the Muslim world into an economic powerhouse. There are people in Central Asia who are negotiating closer relations with the West. Like maybe there's a pathway forward that's peaceful, but we've been so naive. And, you saw what Keir Starmer did 3 weeks ago. It just blew me away. I couldn't believe it. Yeah. He announced publicly that the open border policy that first of all, an open border policy did characterize the UK for like the last decade, that the public was lied to about that, and the people who tried to bring it to light were pilloried, and that it was an experiment that failed, and that he was sorry. And then Kemi Badenoch, who runs the Conservative government, basically said the same thing. It's like, man,
an experiment.
Oh my God, this is like no one
operation
knows.
on the living body. Surgery on the living
by
body.
Untrained surgeons.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of that going on in reality as well.
Yeah, no. I mean, the thing is that in Germany, the situation in Germany is that the Green and Left parties, they invited Muslim immigration because they not only hate the Christian belief, but they hate the Germans. They hate their own people. They want to destroy their social fabric. Just recently, a Saudi guy crashed into a Christmas market.
Oh yeah, I've been watching
and killed
that.
5 people and hurt 200. And of course, the establishment immediately said he was inspired by the anti-immigration blah blah of the AfD, which is absurd from the logical point. And no, the thing is that the Muslim immigration that started with the Syrian war in 2015, and Angela Merkel opened the border and let all the people in. And she said, we can handle it,
Yeah,
and
right.
so on. And the media were jubilant. They said, finally, the Germans are purged and they paid for their sins in the past. They welcome every weak and ill and sick, and now we have an open heart. We talk about altruism later, the fake altruism, the fake that the left use. But and she said we can handle, and we could not handle. Crime went up, group rapes went up, terrorist attacks came. We have no more housing for our own people. Social costs went up. Our own pensioners, they grabble into dirt to get the bottles with the refund and so on. So the whole social fabric is ripped apart. And in my opinion, that is planned in a way. That is a diabolical plan of the left to rip apart society that they despise.
So one of the reasons I was struck in the 80s and 70s in consequence of reading Solzhenitsyn was because one of the revolutionary achievements of Solzhenitsyn was the detailing of the fact that what happened in Stalinist and Leninist Russia was a direct causal consequence of the unfolding of the pathological ideas of the Marxists rather than an aberration, right? So now you can imagine that every systems of ideas are like gods. They're like spirits, and they possess people partially and in totality. And the spirits have an aim and a design, and there's a central aim and design to every system of ideas. And so even if any given green leftist isn't consciously plotting the demolition of the substructure of German society, the system of ideas that possesses them certainly has that in mind, certainly. And I think we'll be able to understand that more and more clearly as these large language models help us understand the structure of the relationship between ideas. That's already starting to happen, but it's definitely the case. You see, and I see echoes of this when I was studying the Old Testament stories, especially the story of, Elijah. Elijah is the first prophet who identifies the voice of conscience as the voice of the divine. It's a major epistemological and ontological revolution. But
it's a great beginning. It's a great introduction to your book. It's a marvelous chapter. The Elijah chapter is wonderful. But
yes, I've improved it too in the second edition because I was unhappy with that first chapter to some degree. And the revision is better. But see, Elijah also stands up against the nature worshipers. And, that's a very archaic conundrum, let's say, but it's not. That's the thing, is that the nature worshipers have the upper hand at the moment, and nature worship has a character. It's a spirit in itself, and it deprioritizes what's human by definition, because if nature's at the pinnacle, then whatever is human is below that. And nature is a very amorphous concept. If admiration for nature is the highest possible virtue, does that mean that a rat and a flea has more value than a child or equal value? It's like, well, you might say, well, that's preposterous. It's like, well, it's preposterous if the vestiges of a Judeo-Christian ethos inhabit you. But it's not at all preposterous if that's been eliminated. Because why would you be a speciesist, for example, and prioritize human beings? Now, of course, the question is, what absolute bloody catastrophe comes lurking out of the shadows when you deprioritize children or human beings in general? And the answer to that is, well, a malevolent hatred for humankind.
Yeah,
that's part of what's lurking under the bed.
Yeah.
And and it's so complex because if you talk to the typical student activist, if you met that person at her parents' dinners, you'd think normal child with some wacky ideas. But if you put 1,000 of them together, then that set of ideas is there in its totality. God only knows what its intention is. That's partly why, this book, We Who Wrestle with God, I'm trying to outline what the central story should and must be. And it looks to me, the Judeo-Christian story is one of voluntary self-sacrifice. Right, that's completely opposite to power. Like there couldn't be two stories that were more different. This is also why in the Passion, in the New Testament accounts of Christ, one of the things that's absolutely central to Christ's mode of conduct is the absolute forswearing of power. Right, and that's but that's part of the theme, is that the proper story is antithetical to power. And now this is a hard thing to grasp because power is compelling and it's existence is obvious, and when hierarchies or psyches deteriorate, they deteriorate in the direction of power. And power is an obvious uniting story. You see that in the Lord of the Rings. It's the one ring that unites them all is the ring of power. It's like, yes, exactly. So what supersedes power? And the answer is, this is the answer. Voluntary self-sacrifice supersedes power.
It's
and
the
I try to make
temptation.
that case technically in the book.
It's a temptation that Lucifer is offering Jesus, of course, in the
Of
desert.
course.
You know, you have all the power, and
Of course, exactly.
there's a wonderful line. I know you're an adamant reader of Dostoevsky, and I in the Demons. I think it's Shigalev, or I mean, the bunch of intellectuals that are pictured in the Demons, they are very much from today. You can see them, the nihilists, you know, and the people who are working on destructing everything. You know, there's a revolutionary Bible. You know, first we need to tear everything down and then build up again. And there is a person, there is a sentence, I don't know who says it. If I have to choose between Jesus and the truth, I would decide for Jesus. So that is also a commitment to the figure, the passion, and to the figure of Jesus, you know, which is basically the foundation of truth. But let me come to...
Yes, right. Well, that's a very important point, is that, I mean, part of what Dostoevsky is pointing to there is that you could say this and it would be true. Any truth in the absence of appreciation for the necessity of voluntary self-sacrifice is not true. Now, this is a strange thing because it's not the kind of truth that the Enlightenment types put forward, because their truth is factual. But as we already said, the problem with those claims is that you have an infinite number of equally high priority facts. That's not knowledge, that's just chaos. There's no difference between an infinite array of facts of equal value and the world itself.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. You have to prioritize. Now, the question is, in service of what? And what I tried to lay out in We Who Wrestle with God is that there's an ethos that unites psychologically, that quells anxiety and provides hope. And that same ethos can unite socially. But it is a ethos of self-sacrifice. And the self that's sacrificed is the immediate demands of hedonistic whim, essentially. And of course, that's the same as maturity. Like, obviously, I mean, the reason you socialize 2-year-olds is because they want what they want right now, regardless of the consequences for them or anyone else. Well, and then if you accede to those demands of your 2-year-old, he or she just becomes a complete pathological tyrant. No friends, no future, like highly probable criminal outcome. Well, obviously that doesn't work. And it's also equally obvious that the basis of community is sacrifice. Because if it's about you, you're not social. Like if it's about the narrow you, like clearly. So back to the problem with Germany. The problem, the deepest strata of problem is that we've lost our proper orientation with regards to storing. And everything flows from that. That's the culture that's upstream from politics. Now, part of the reason that I'm touring Europe again is to discuss precisely these issues. It's like, what should and must the story be? Well, I actually think we can understand that now. And maybe for the first time, like with clear understanding. Dostoevsky was a real pointer to it. You know, but even Dostoevsky, he still had to encapsulate it in narrative, right? Like I've always thought of Dostoevsky as a superior thinker to Nietzsche. They're very similar in many ways, but Nietzsche was much more propositional, much more explicit, but shallower because of that.
Dostoevsky explored the soul of nihilism, and he is just a master in describing the very sinister, more sinister corners of the soul than ever. But again, to your book, which is a wonderful read, and all the stories of striving to the highest, of Abraham's adventure, just go, of his failings as well, the significance of sacrifice. The book comes at the right time. It comes at the time when even the churches are on their way to distort the Bible,
yeah. Well, in
the
Canada,
foundational.
the mainstream Protestant church in Canada is no longer, it's neither Christian nor functional. It's just gone. It's been taken over by the LGBT alphabet mob.
Yeah.
It's run by a woman who's
Yeah.
an avowed atheist. You see exactly the same
in
thing happening
Germany.
with the Anglican Church in the UK.
Same thing in Germany. We had a so-called Kirchentag, a church day, where a pastor said, God is queer, which seems to be the only problem that the churches these days have, to decide if God was queer. And I learned about a boycott against the, I'm just reading, just read a biography on Michelangelo, Tumultuous Times in the Quattrocento, and his painting of the Sistine Chapel, the protest against God as a white male, against an old white male. That is the problems, the theological problems the churches have these days. It is so ridiculous.
Well, even the Catholics, they're obsessed
even
with
the Catholics.
Yeah, I know. And what Pope Francis did allowed over Christmas with Christ being wrapped in a keffiyeh, that was just, it's beyond the pale.
It is.
It's beyond the pale. Yeah. And I mean, the Orthodox Church is still holding its ground, I think, primarily because it's so embedded in ritual. And the Catholics are maybe second in place in terms of managing to hold on to the core doctrines. But the Protestants everywhere in the West, except the US,
in Germany, the Catholic Church is again looking for the Deutschen Sonderweg, for the German special path, as they already did with the Protestantism in the 16th century. They try to become Protestant. They try to get away with celibacy, and they want to have women as priests and all this stuff. So they're smashing the rules, if you so will, and by sheer progressive will. And the thing is, I wondered if I should. I'm a Catholic, and I'm a lector, and I read the gospel before the priest preaches. And today's gospel is wonderful. It's Johannes. At the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and it's wonderful for a new year to have a reminder on the very beginning of it all. But the Catholic Church in Germany is LGBTQ, and it's terrible. And I learned, by the way, that your wife converted to Catholicism. I hope to Orthodox Catholicism, more in the meaning of Gilbert K. Chesterton and his orthodoxy.
Yeah.
And I wish her very well. And I know she was sick, and she healed wondrously. And by the way, I want to console you on the loss of your parents, which really got to my heart. I saw you speaking about it at Piers Morgan, and my deepest regrets. But your book again comes at the right time, the right point to rectify and bring back, put back into the trail the foundational document of our civilization. It's the Bible. And congratulations to that. And I read with admiration and enthusiasm, especially your chapters about the Exodus. And I always wondered why the people, the chosen people, needed 40 years to finally reach the Holy Land. It's 3 generations. And you gave a very good explanation. You said it takes time to change, to alter the attitude, the character, maybe generations. And I was wondering how much generations we Germans need to change ourselves.
Well, it's a good example. It's a good example of something that seems like kind of a primitive error. Well, it's not that far a journey. How could it possibly take 40 years? These people didn't know what they were talking about. It's like, if you're confused enough, it takes you forever to get nowhere. And when you're lost in the desert, you're lost. You have no sense of direction. You're fractionated. And the idea that it takes 3 generations, it's like, I think that's probably optimistic. It takes 3 generations if you have Moses leading you.
Yeah.
Like, if you have Satan himself leading you, you'd be lost in the desert forever.
Yeah. And it's so funny that Moses, the leader, has a speech impediment.
Yeah, right.
He needs somebody on his side.
Again, it's well, I really understood that to mean that, Moses does delve deeply into things, and as a consequence of pursuing his calling and his conscience. And when God reveals himself to Moses, which is what happens to people who take things seriously, then he has a duty. And God's proclamation to Moses is, well, of course you have flaws. Like, what's your point? It's up to you to do. It's up to you to persevere upward, regardless of your flaws. And Moses says, well, you want me to be a political leader or leader? I can't even speak. And God basically says, well, first of all, that's your problem. Sort it out. If you're with me, all things are possible. And then he gives them a hint. He says, well, there's some people around you, you could turn to them. Don't you have a brother? Can't he speak?
Yeah.
It's like, it's not only on you.
Yeah.
I would say in some ways, we each have an infinite amount of responsibility to bear, but none of us can do that alone.
Yeah, I very much liked your efforts. You're chewing on the bone. Why God is speaking through the flames of the bush, why Moses has to get stripped of his sandals, why he has to approach him barefoot, and all those little details are so. At this point, I need to show the book to all the readers, German readers. It is a marvelous, a gripping tale of the Bible, a retelling tale, and a deep exploration of the mysteries. They're abundant in the Bible. Some mysteries I haven't solved until now, and it is a page turner. I strongly recommend to read that.
I should say too, I have time for this.
Okay, good.
So we're
Wonderful.
not in a rush.
No,
really.
no, it's great to hear.
I really regard this as crucially important. I mean,
Yeah.
There's been a big change in the US. Canada is going to flip, but Europe is in serious trouble. And so
it is.
That's partly why I'm going to tour in May and June.
Yeah.
It's like, so I all the time you need today, just take, and don't feel the least bit like you're not imposing. It's an opportunity for me.
That is very, very gracious of you. I wanted to, because we were talking about altruism, the whole immigration welcome, refugee welcome area was enclosed in the altruism thing, and there is a nice, very nice quote by Thomas of Aquinas, who says something to the regard, charity without justice. No, justice without charity might be gruesome and cruel. But charity without justice leads to dissolution, to the dissolution.
Well, it's worse. It's worse than that. It's worse. That's true. That's indiscriminate mercy.
Yeah.
Okay, so but it's worse than that because, all right, so we'll hit this from a variety of different perspectives. So Christ's foremost enemies are the Pharisees. It's Pharisees, scribes, and lawyers.
Yeah.
Religious hypocrites, academics, and lawyers. Okay, nothing has changed. Okay, so now the question is, who are the Pharisees? Well, Christ tells them who they are very clearly, and this is really one of the cardinal reasons he gets crucified. He says, okay, we'll situate this. First of all, they're those who break the third commandment or the fourth commandment, thou shalt not take God's name in vain. Okay, what does that commandment mean? It means do not claim divine virtue for your own self-serving maneuvering.
Yeah.
Right. So don't claim to speak in the name of God when you're just pursuing your own bloody, miserable ends.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, Eve sins in that manner by being hyper altruistic. She clutches the serpent to her breast. And Adam sins by saying, anything you want, dear. And so, those are the cardinal sin patterns of men and women. And so the female pattern of Phariseeism is, my compassion is so overweening that it encompasses the world. Now, she's doing that for Pharisaical reasons. So Christ tells the Pharisees, you make a show of your moral virtue so you can enhance your social status.
Yes.
Right.
Virtue signaling.
Well, and this is it's so brilliant and so trenchant because there is almost nothing more important to people than social reputation. Yeah. And justly so. Now, you should earn social reputation by being usefully self-sacrificing. That's what Abel does. And it works, but it can be gamed. And it's gamed by narcissists and psychopaths. And we know this clinically. What the narcissists and the psychopaths do is they manipulate claims of moral virtue to obtain false status, or they play the victim game, which they're also very good at. And so we're suffering from an excess, and Germany and Canada would be foremost among that. We're suffering from an excess of Pharisaism. It's like people want all the social positioning that goes with true moral status without making any of the actual sacrifices, or by sacrificing other people. And it's a complete epidemic. It's a complete epidemic.
It's not the love to the next one, but to the ones far away, to all the oppressed people at the edges of the world. It's nothing but virtue signaling. Interestingly enough, because I'm preparing a reader on Chesterton. Chesterton once had this discussion with his publisher Blatchford, and he was talking about charity and Christian virtues. And he wrote, Mr. Blatchford is not only an early Christian, but he is the only early Christian who ought really to have been eaten by lions. Because he looked through the preposterous attitude of charity and that stuff, and it's just.
Well, I think you can mark a charitable endeavor that's valid by referring to the sacrifice, right? Like, first of all, it's very difficult to do good, and merely spending money doesn't do it by any stretch of the imagination. It's very difficult to do good. There's a lot more ways to make things worse than there are to make them better. And so careless do-gooding that's Pharisaical virtue signaling. It's unbelievably pathological. And maybe it's also the kind of pathology that tends to characterize an affluent society. Could easily be, but it's unbelievably dangerous. Yeah. And I think you can tell whether someone is actually pursuing a path that's good by looking at the genuine cost to them. If the sacrifices they're making are sacrifices paid for by other people, well, that's what politicians do all the time. They
throw money. The story of the merciful Samaritan is that this guy gets personally involved in
at risk to himself.
And he's paying, he's bringing him to the hospital, and he promised to come back. He's personally involved. He's engaged. Whereas our so-called altruists say, let the state do it, and it's yeah.
Well, you can understand that psychologically. I mean, imagine that I want to accrue false virtue to enhance my reputation. So I outsource the risk to the state. And then the state takes all the risk and the people that the state preys on. And then I can claim alliance with the state. There's zero cost to me. I just have to say, well, I believe, of course, the migrants are welcome. I mean, those people are often parodied on X, for example. You get the odd conservative troll who will interview a lefty at a protest and have an immigrant in tow and ask them directly if they'll take them into their house. And of course, the answer to that is always no, because the border of the house, well, that's sacrosanct, but the border of the country, well, that's distant enough to sacrifice without concern.
But if you're opposed to that thinking, to that very cheap altruism, you are called a Nazi.
Yeah, right.
When I had a short stint at the paper Die Welt, who brought that infamous Elon Musk op-ed, 1 year, that was the year of the refugee welcome hysteria, and I wrote a book out from the machine room of that paper with all the bigotries, and I called it White Rabbit, a little bit self-promoting, White Rabbit. Why? Because I thought, White Rabbit, the song by Jefferson Airplane, the psychedelic rock song. My take on it was that the people in Germany had LSD in their water, and that elevated them to that refugee welcome hysteria. And by the way, the book is out of print, and there is a new brochured edition. Anyway, so I was fired after a year. They kicked me out because I wrote too favorably. There was the story of a black guy who was running an office for the AfD in Kiel. And he stood in front of broken windows, and on the windows there was smeared the word racist. He was a black guy, and he was blamed being a racist by some stone throwers of the Antifa. That's how crazy it goes.
That happens all the time in the States. Any black conservative faces. Well, remember, as we discussed, the consequence for Christ of opposing the Pharisees was crucifixion. Right. I mean, being tarred and feathered as a Nazi is this, what would you say, that it's the symbolic equivalent, right? Especially if you understand that, of course, the only possible punishment once you're a Nazi, the only possibly appropriate punishment is like an ignominious death, clearly. In fact, it becomes a moral obligation.
Of course, you need to kill Hitler. And that gives them the satisfaction to be on the right side. But since we talked and you talked about Europe, the stalemate we have in Germany is also whole of Europe. You see that the right in France is sort of prevented from forming politics because of the coalition of other parties.
Netherlands too, and even though they won clearly in the Netherlands. I mean, I don't even understand the government situation in the Netherlands at the moment.
So it's a stalemate. It's the party system that blocks out, under the pretext of fighting the Nazis, any proposal that is common sense, any proposal that is like closing a border. Is a necessary thing for every nation with a welfare state to survive and to have their laws and so on. And it's widespread in Europe. And Europe, I don't know if you know that, is run by a German, Ursula von der Leyen. She is very heavily involved in the Pfizer scandal for taking money, and she's under surveillance, and and she is a sort of an agent of the Green Party in Germany. She calls herself a Christian Democrat, but of course she is green, and she is responsible for the Green Deal that ruins every farmer and every business in Germany. She is responsible for 15,000 bankruptcies in Germany, and that is the very sad situation all over Europe.
That's
And
why we set up the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship.
the what?
The Alliance for Responsible Citizenship.
Yeah, of course.
Yes,
That's your organization. You speak about it.
We have some rules for it, by the way.
Yeah.
So the first rule is that it's invitational and in the broadest possible sense, which means that we will not put forward any philosophical justification for policies that require fear or force.
Good.
It has to be invitational.
Good. Very good.
It has to be distributed as well. So it's not top down. It's not centralized. Now, whether you can have an international organization that doesn't devolve into centralization, that's an open question. But we needed some sort of alternative to the WEF and to the EU because it's become so pathological. I think the WEF is probably on its deathbed by all appearances. You may have noticed, for example, that even the Democrats under Kamala Harris said nothing about climate.
No.
Nothing. No. They took it off the agenda. They didn't announce that. I know this, by the way. This isn't
they finally come to senses. Yeah.
Well, at least by omission, right? They wouldn't come out and say this was all a anti-industrial, pro-Chinese lie, let's say, but they've at least let it lie. And we did an ARC meeting. We held an ARC meeting in Bavaria. There was about 200 Germans there, and Bjorn Lomborg spoke most particularly well on the climate issue. And the Germans told us pretty much to a man and a woman that they were so relieved that someone would begin the discussion, but that in Germany, you opposed the climate apocalypse narrative at your practical and spiritual peril. And that's just it. You can see it dissolving. It's dissolving in Canada. It's dissolving in the United States. It's going to dissolve in the UK because the UK is just about in as bad a shape as you guys are with regards to energy costs.
Yeah.
And, one of the policies of ARC, for example, is that well, we should remediate absolute poverty if that's possible, not least because when people aren't starving, they take a longer term view of the future and become more intelligently environmental locally, but also that the best pathway to that is clearly abundant, inexpensive energy. Yes. And there's another example. This is so interesting, with regard to the central pathology of the psychopathic and narcissistic left, because obviously you destroy poor people when you make energy expensive. Like I can't think of an economic proposition that has less doubt than that one. And it's clear that the Greens would destroy the poor to demolish industry.
That is the point, Mr. Peterson. The impoverished countries want to have access to the stuff the developed countries that made the developed countries grow, and if we rob that, they stay poor, and that is such a grievance, and they don't realize that is the consequences of carbon-free whatever you believe in.
Well, maybe that's part of the reason the immigration policies are the way they are, is that if you make it impossible for the undeveloped countries to become wealthy, you have to expiate your guilt by welcoming economic refugees to the West.
Yeah. The hope that I have is that the Green Party was very much in favor of lowering the voting age from 18 to 16. And it turns out they miscalculated, because it turned out that the young kids are flocking to the AfD because it's their future that is on the risk, you know. So that is the hope. Maybe we talked about generations to come. My hope is that young kids don't longer glue themselves on the streets. By the way, last generation these days is thinking of a new name because the speaker of the last generation said, "We are not sure if we are really the last generation." So maybe it's the youth, it's the upcoming generation that comes to senses because it's their future.
You know, I just rewatched Cabaret. You know the movie?
Yeah, of course I know.
I can't imagine a movie that's a better description of the current state of affairs in the West. You have the rise of the hedonists and the counterposition of the Nazis.
Yeah.
And the hedonists, in some ways, in that movie, they invite in the totalitarians with glee.
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason for that is that as hedonism degenerates into unsustainable and psychologically costly chaos, there's a longing that arises in the psyche for an ordering principle. And if there's no alternative put forward that's sophisticated, the ordering principle will clearly be the tyrannical father.
Yeah.
That
is so interesting what you say, because there is this saying, and I hope, I'm sure you know it. Some Italian writer says, if fascism comes again, he won't say, I'm fascism. He will say, I'm anti-fascism.
Yeah, right.
And that is the situation. And the situation in Germany is that we have we have the so-called Verfassungsschutz, which is if you so will, a follow-up organization to the infamous Gestapo of the Nazi. The Verfassungsschutz is an inland secret service that sniffs out your political leanings, that sniffs out everything. They even can send you the police if you make a joke on one of the leading Green Party members. And by the way, the editor of the Weltwoche, which will partly print our interview, just today wrote a piece on the remoteness of the political class from the real people. We have a sort of an ancien regime. We have politicians who spend thousands of taxpayers' euros for makeup artists, for hairdressers, for photographers, for, keeping up an image, a useful image, and all that crap. And so it's with the glee, what you say, with the fascism comes with a new makeup, and it's creeping into society and calls himself.
Well, you see that in the UK with non-crime hate incidents.
Yeah.
Right. And then Canada, there's new legislation in Canada with Bill C-63 that's going to institute a system that'll make your German political police look like pretenders. It's the most totalitarian legislation I've ever seen, I would say. It's beyond comprehension. You can report under this new legislation. This is literally the case. And I think it'll pass before Trudeau meets his demise. I could report you on the suspicion, based on my fear, that you might say something hateful in the next year. And a provincial magistrate can fit you with an electronic surveillance bracelet for a year, monitor all your social interactions, and monitor your blood, your bodily fluids as well.
That is like the movie with Tom Cruise. I don't know what the name is. Future Crime.
Minority Report.
Yeah, Minority Report. It's gruesome, and it's increasing. So, what can we do? I think what we can do is organizing organizations like you did with the what's the name again? Responsible.
The Alliance. It's the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, ARC,
like that.
ARC. Yeah, and we have our next convention in February in the UK.
Okay.
Yes,
Maybe I
and
can attend that. Yeah.
well, do. It looks to
Yeah.
me, it's highly likely that this is
Yeah.
going to become, and this is a danger as well as an opportunity. It's highly likely that this is going to become the go-to international conference.
Very
The
good.
first one was very successful. We had one in Australia and one in Germany,
Yeah.
and they both went over extremely well. And we're trying to, it's not exactly a political organization, right? One of the things we're trying to promote is the idea that we have to get our story straight once again. And that's going to mean a return to the principles that made the free countries of the world free and attractive. And that this time, though, it's going to have to be accompanied by a deeper, explicit understanding of why those principles work, which is what I outlined in We Who Wrestle with God. I wrote 3 books at the same time, by the way, and one of them concentrated on Job and the Passion. And it'll come out as another volume in a year or 2, something like that. But I'm trying to elaborate out this a uniting ethos, so it unites psychologically and socially, that accepts the proposition that the fundamental element of our perceptual structure is a story, but that the story has a necessary structure. Like it has to be something like mutual self-sacrifice, because that is the communal story. And it is also the sacrifice in the individual sphere of the present for the future. And that's the hallmark of civilization, fundamentally. It's costly, because it's difficult to sacrifice the present for the future. It takes a tremendous degree of self-control, say, and an ability to forego gratification, which is the same thing. But partly what I'm trying to do in the volumes is to make a technical case that that's the only form of psychological and social arrangement that scales, iterates, improves, and expands. Power can't. Hedonism, that's it. Look, I mean, on the hedonistic front, all that's happened because of the sexual revolution is the destruction of sex. That's the people who have the
only pornography is left from sex. That is. Do you? There's your efforts. Then I heard that Elon Musk is speaking very favorably again of Christianity. And he lost his. You made this wonderful interview. He lost his son to the woke mob. Donald Trump is speaking very favorably of religion. Do you think? And Martin Scorsese right now is working on a series of saints, about saints, and a new film on Jesus. So,
Brad Pitt just announced that he was a Christian. By the way, Neil Ferguson. Brad Pitt.
Neil Ferguson,
Neil Ferguson, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, Douglas Murray is on the verge, Tom Holland, Russell Brand.
Richard Dawkins even calls himself a cultural Christian. And that is the interesting point in the Moses chapters. You really discuss with Dawkins. And you're trying to bridge the evolutionary and the theology in a way.
Well, I had a rule. I had an intellectual rule. I've really applied it to everything I've written. 6 maps of meaning. I try not to make any statements that aren't theologically justified and scientifically justified simultaneously. I took apart Richard Gene's selfish gene idea, for example, in the chapters of Abraham, because the problem with his theory, the theory is not correct, because the human pattern of reproduction, only begins with sex. Like the selfish gene hypothesis depends on the proposition that reproduction and sex are the same thing. That's true for like fish and mosquitoes, but it's not at all true for human beings, because we're long-term investors in our children. Low number, high investment. Well, selfish is no way of conceptualizing that. This is why I was so interested in the Abrahamic story, because Abraham is portrayed as the father of nations. And so it's implicit in the story is that if you want to be the father of nations, so successful reproductively, let's say, you have to follow the Abrahamic pattern. And that's a pattern of upward striving self-sacrifice, like upward striving adventurous self-sacrifice. And one of the things I've found is that young men in particular, we talked a little bit about young people, young men are so hungry for validation of the idea that adventurous self-sacrifice is the proper story, that as soon as you explain it to them, like it's revolutionary. I've talked to so many young men, like literally thousands of them on the street and at my shows who come up and say, you know, they listened to what I said and understood it, and they just put their life together, you know, because they were finally motivated. They thought, oh, I see. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. You know, they quit drinking, they quit sleeping around, they stop living moment to moment, they start making a plan, they start looking for a long-term partner, a marriage, you know, they start prioritizing children. It's so good to see. And all, you know, the reports, it's not like I've had anybody come up to me and say, I took your advice and my life is degenerated and, you know, everything's worse. It's never. It's partly why I keep touring. You know, it's so heartwarming. It's so inspiring to hear how useful these ideas are. I'm not taking credit for that because it's not like they're my ideas, although I've been privileged to communicate them.
But you know what? My son very much profited and sort of, changed his life around. And you are very influential. And thank you for that.
It's such a privilege. I mean, there's nothing better that you could possibly do as a psychologist and a lecturer.
I think that is it for now. I thank you so much.
There's one other thing I'd like to just point out. Well, you know that I lost my position at the university, essentially, and that meant the demolition of my research career. It just became impossible for me to continue for a variety of reasons, although it took me a while to figure that out. One of the consequences of that is that my daughter and my son-in-law and I started an online university, Peterson Academy, and we launched that a month and a half ago, and it has the best lectures in the world on it because I'm in a position where I can identify people like that and invite them to lecture, and they do. We have 40 courses online already and 4 more a month coming. They're produced better than any lectures have ever been produced by a lot. They're Hollywood style, Hollywood quality productions. And it's extremely inexpensive. It's about twice as much per month as a Wall Street Journal subscription. And within 2 or 3 years, we'll have a full Bachelor of Arts, great books curriculum at hand with a science and mathematics emphasis. And so if people are interested, they should check that out. It's Peterson Academy. And it's been far more successful than we had hoped. We've been open for about a month and a half now, and we have 40,000 students.
Wow.
And so, there's also a social media component because we took the best pieces of the social media platforms, but we have rules of conduct. They're not censorship rules. They're genuine rules of conduct. You have to comport yourself properly, but because there's a fee, there's no bots, there's no trolls, there's no bad corporate actors. We've kicked off 4 people out of 40,000 for misbehavior, and that's all it took. And the social media platform is very positive and very active and supportive in a way that's real and not naive. And so
I would definitely go in for it and announce it. And you see, it's initiatives like that gives me hope. It's the civil society, and it's brilliant minds like yourselves who circumvent the normal academic way to bring sense to the people again, you know?
Well, it's so funny because we've been reaching out. We have a lot of professors from Oxford and Cambridge, for example, and they're so delighted to participate. I mean, they're a little uncertain to begin with, but we bring them to our studio and we really treat people well because we only invite people that we are happy about, I mean, who are highly competent. And then we tell them, you can teach whatever you want. There's no editorial interference at all. We want you to take the course that you always wanted to teach and to do it the best that you possibly can. And that's the only rule. And so they come down. It's also good for them financially. It's better than a book deal generally. And so they come down and they find out that we mean what we say and that they're treated very well and that it happens very efficiently. And then all of them want to come back. So we have a stable now of 40 professors who are really at the top of their game, who are pretty much willing to work with us.
Wow.
Whenever there's an opportunity. It's unbelievably exciting. And we figure our joke is 10 times the quality, 1/20th the cost.
Sounds like a good deal.
It's a good deal. It's a good deal.